Hey everyone, and thanks for joining me on today's podcast of Trafficking Free America, where we have discussions around topics that causes abuse, trafficking, trauma, and sexual addiction in our country, and how we can begin to stop it. In today's episode, we talk about pornography, a very large contributor toward the commercial sex industry. It sounds like a touchy subject, but if we're all being honest, the sensitivity of the subject is what often causes us not to deal with it as a society. In our episode, I am joined by a sexual addiction therapist, a former and recovered buyer, and a woman counselor that primarily helps women deal with their spouse's sexual addiction. While the majority of our audience is likely of the opinion that pornography is bad, horrible, despicable, and always wrong, some may differ in their opinion, or they won't admit that while they know it's wrong, they still engage with it. No matter which person you are in that scenario, I believe you'll find the discussion in this episode educational, eye-opening, and will help guide you to being more proactive to stop a possible addiction in someone's life or even your own. All right, guys, thanks for joining me today. For our viewers, let's introduce everybody. So we have Alan, we have Dave, and we have Kristy. I'll let each of you introduce yourselves to the audience of who you are and why you were asked to be here today. Alan?
Hey, good morning, everyone. I'm Alan Teixeira. I was featured in a video series that we did last year on recovered sex buyer. I was proud to do that. Very happy with how it turned out. The Institute Against Human Trafficking and Jeremy have asked me to participate again this year with going just a little bit deeper on issues of sex addiction and how we can deal with that and the impact it's having and connection to the illicit sex market in our communities. So thank you so much for having me.
Of course. And Dave, you're a new one here. Yeah.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm David Hudson. I am the president of the Sexual Integrity Project with Alan. And I'm also a counselor who specializes in trauma and sex addiction. I'm excited to talk today about our topics.
And then we have Kristy.
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Kristy Collins. I am here this morning representing the women who have been betrayed and their stories and their sorrows and how to get to the other side. So hopefully today I will bring you some hope.
That's what we're looking for. So what we're going to be talking about today is pornography. It's a lovely subject, isn't it, everybody? The reason why we're talking about pornography is because between U.S. Institute Against Human Trafficking and Kids Not for Sale, we've been talking about fighting the demand. And in fighting the demand is ultimately those who purchase sex. And you cannot hide from pornography when you think about those who purchase sex. It's literally like the guidebook in many ways that they seem to be putting in front of everyone to say, hey, look, this is what people do, and leads to many different things. The view about pornography is, I've seen it to be very broad, and some people view it as terrible. Like, if you watch porn, you're kind of sick, right? Like, I think that's sick to do anything like that, with married or not. Or it's viewed as it's okay unless you're married, otherwise then it's unfaithful. Or pornography is okay. It's actually a healthy thing, It's entertainment, a form of entertainment that we can do, but just don't take it out into the world. It's kind of like watching an action movie, okay? Just because you watch an action movie doesn't mean you kill somebody, right? These are all the different kind of things we've heard. But what we want to get into today is talk about what opinion, honestly, you should have about pornography based upon the research, based upon what happens into your brain when you get involved with pornography, and ultimately, who's watching it. I'll start off with one fact right now. It is illegal in the U.S. to present porn to anyone under 18. I'm glad we live in a country, everybody, that we make sure that no one under 18 watches pornography.
It's interesting because most of the consumers are between 14 and 17.
Precisely. So for someone to say, oh, we've taken a step forward to make this illegal. No, you're not. We haven't. We haven't done anything. So
it's like outlawing sunrises or something like that.
So let's talk about what porn ultimately does to the brain, and let's kind of go down that route. Dave, I know that you gave kind of a presentation. You've talked about this many times. If I were to ask you, simply put, what does pornography do to your brain? What would you say?
I would categorize pornography use as a maladaptive behavior to some negative experiences. That would be the short version of it. So when someone doesn't want to feel, or specifically doesn't want to feel bad, they will use a substance to make them, or a process to make them not feel, right? They want to numb everything out. And porn is a really good way to do that. When you start to act out or go through that process, your brain's going to release a whole bunch of chemicals. Chief of those is going to be dopamine. So we sort of call it a dopamine addiction, but there's really a whole bunch of stuff involved with it. So all that dopamine gets released that you get from normal activities, like when you complete a load of laundry, when you complete a task at work, you get a reward for that. But by doing these types of behaviors, you get a big, giant surge of it. And so our brains are naturally going to seek after a way to get all that dopamine as easy as possible. And unfortunately, the way we've created the access to pornography, it's made it really easy. It's private. You can do it in a way no one knows. You know, if you go into another room and get drunk and you come out, people are going to see it. But if you go into a room and view some porn, most of the time people are going to recognize it. So you can keep it very isolated and very private. You can get it anytime you want. Right now, I could pull up any of these devices we have in this room and get any type of perversion we could ever possibly imagine instantaneously without any type of verification. It's easy to get it, and so your brain's going to be drawn to it immediately. So you develop sort of a dependency on getting all your dopamine that way. You don't need to do it other ways. You'd be very lethargic after that, wouldn't you?
Well, okay. Let's talk. Let me play devil's advocate here for a moment.
Sure.
Okay, so if porn helps you relax, is that a bad thing? And if you're able to do it in private and not bring it out to the public, like you said, what's the problem with it? Sounds like it's the best drug then in that situation.
Well, what I said was that no one would see it. It didn't mean they wouldn't be affected. Mm-hmm. So anytime that you are numbed out from life, you're going to lose one of the three basic components, which is relating. So you have achieving, being, and relating. And if you're numbed out and not connected, everyone around you is going to notice it. We see it constantly. The men who come into, and I deal primarily with men, who come into my office, they're disconnected at work, they're disconnected at home, they really don't have any relationships. It is, in fact, we actually call all this an intimacy disorder. That's the inability to effectively connect spiritually, physically, intellectually, emotionally, and socially. So I say that they don't see the effects, but the effects are there, and everyone feels it. So when they are disconnected, they're going to be apart from everybody else.
What do you think the effects are, Kristy, if you were to try to think about, like, is there any way to really know if someone's, like, addicted to porn, like, by the way they live their life?
Ooh, that's a really great question. I think what we see is more and more distance between them and their other relationships, because as they continue to move into that escape world, being interactive with other human beings is risky, and there's challenge and there's conflict, and that makes them uncomfortable. It's so much easier to have a relationship with a screen and what's going on that screen. So I think maybe that's what we would see, is they would start to pull away and isolate.
When you say relationships, are you talking about just, intimate relationships, like man and wife or boyfriend, girlfriend, whichever, like, or are you talking about just in general?
I would think in general, because I know most of the women that I work with, they're completely unaware that their men are heavily engaged in porn. Like they didn't have a clue this was going on.
Well, why? Why do you think that is?
I don't know. I'd have to throw that back over to Dave.
That's a tough question. I mean, it's like
I actually have some insight here.
Yeah.
Dave mentioned the primary chemical that's released with the male orgasm is dopamine. There's another chemical, vasopressin. That's the hormone in men that serves as a bonding hormone. Most of us have heard about oxytocin with the ladies bonding them to their babies, and when they're skin to skin with a man, it bonds them to that man. So men have a chemical or a hormone that does this for them, vasopressin. So that's released at the same time. And men are very visual. So what's happening is they're bonding to the image they're looking at that moment. Now, God designed men to have this because we're supposed to be gazing into the eyes of our betrothed to our wife when we have those relations. And it is a mechanism to continuously bond the man to his spouse and strengthen that bond over time. Lots of folks, we've all heard them say that porn's okay and it doesn't hurt anybody. But the reality is that just as vasopressin released with the male orgasm will bond them to their wife, it will also bond them to any other person or any other image that they're viewing at the moment of sexual release. So this chemical that was meant to attract us to our wives and strengthen that attraction now gets perverted and diluted to attract us to a multitude of images that we're viewing online or, back in the day on video tapes or magazines, and it dilutes that. So I would push back and say, how can de-attracting men to their wives be good for society?
And how exactly are they becoming de-attracted to their wives?
Because they're diluting their attention, to all these other images.
It's also
it can unattract them to their wife, and that's destructive to the family. That is how sex addiction is destroying families. And to the women who had no idea, I don't blame them. A fish doesn't know it's wet. If their husband is acting out with these behaviors in secret, her experience with him is not everything that it could be, and it just remains unchanged over the years, and she's quite obviously just going to assume that this is how things are in my marriage.
So I can give sort of an illustration to where I think maybe you wouldn't recognize if someone was addicted to sex or not. First of all, it is, I should say, addicted to porn, which is an addiction to sex. But there's a person in my life, when I met them, they were most times heavily drugged on painkillers. I just met them, viewed them as a very chill person. I didn't see that. My wife, on the other hand, knew them very well, and she always knew when they were high. So if I met them when they were high, I didn't know that they were ultimately high on something like painkillers. You can usually know drunk. You can usually know like the goofiness of maybe someone on marijuana or something like that, right? But when it comes to painkillers, it's kind of that subtle high that you really only know it if you know the person well. So my wife always knew, but I didn't. And then he got sober, and then I know. Or there's signs of it. Like, I know what you're like sober, and I know what you're like high on this painkiller. So now I understand. I believe that if a spouse were to be hit with the fact that their spouse or something like that is addicted to pornography, and that person were to stop doing pornography, actually become sober from it, and then go back into it, relapse, I think she would know the difference. Or he, whichever.
100%.
Mm-hmm.
So
yep.
It's, like you said, it's a hidden thing. It's harder to detect, but it's creating hardship. It's creating distance.
So let's spend a second talking about the dynamic that you asked about between the offended spouse and the offending spouse is a term that we might use, or partner.
Sure.
So most of these guys who are acting out into sexual acting out didn't start Tuesday, right? They started back 12, 13, sometimes earlier than that, 7, 8, often prepubescent, but very often pubescent. So as they've gone through the years, I won't say through maturation because they didn't mature, but as they've gone through aging, that's who they've been. So the partnership that develops with someone, in order for an addict to exist, there must be a codependent. In fact, the word we used to use was co-addict. We've changed that a little recently to codependent. So that they are seeking out a partner who is going to continue them in their dysfunction. I'm going to say something that is a little jarring at first, but if you hear me out, it'll make a little sense. The offending spouse or offending partner is 100% responsible for all the stupid choices they're making, without any question. Both partners are equally responsible for the condition of their marriage or relationship. So they are choosing a dynamic until that dynamic becomes untenable, until something happens to disrupt it. Perhaps the spouse starts to go get well. Well, that changes the dynamic and they have to do something. If the one who's dealing with the addiction goes and gets well or starts that process, the dynamic changes. They have to do something, or an event that brings all this to a head, which is most common. And then people can start to heal from it. So how do they not know what's going on? They don't want to know until they have to know. And once they reach that point, then women have this amazing intuition given them by God. They know something's up. They always know something's up. They might not have it. They'll take this puzzle piece and they'll sometimes cram pieces that don't really fit in the puzzle, but they're going to solve this puzzle and they're going to figure it out. And I believe that's a gifting by God for these women to protect them from what men can do and what they're capable of, what we're capable of. So when you ask me how do they know or not know, sometimes they're in the relationship because they want it to be that way. They're comfortable in their maladaptive behavior until they're not comfortable anymore. And that's kind of what we want to do, is disrupt that, make them uncomfortable, to say, hey, this is not cool. We got to cut this out. Let me help you.
I would agree. However, I would question if you have a young lad who has started looking at porn at, the numbers 8, 9, 10, 12, 14, and meets a young lady at 26, 24, 28, somewhere in that range, and they get married, isn't he just so good at his behavior and covering his tracks? She's not really meeting the real him.
Correct.
But what we're also learning is he's not really meeting the real her either. And so, the young ladies have trauma. The young men have usually some trauma in their background. And so we've got hurt people meeting hurt people, getting married. And then, 6, 8, 10 years down the road, we wonder why it crumbles.
What about 100%. The person, because I want to make sure we're not just talking about the extreme here. What about the person introduced when they were 8, 9, 10, whichever, which is, let's just be real here. I don't know if anyone that wasn't, I don't know if anyone that has not seen porn before the age of 8. I literally do not know of any person that, anyone who admits to me that they've seen porn will admit like 8 years old, just at least in my demographic of, in my 30s, right? I believe anyone who's had access to the internet since they were 8 years old, or movies since they were 8 years old, has seen it. Anyway, what about the person who's seen it, sometimes has had moments, seasonal addictions, if you would? And what I mean by that is there's a difference between someone who says, I need alcohol every day, or I need 2 drinks of alcohol every day to function, versus the person who's like drinking alcohol 3 or 4 times a week. So it's like they're not an alcoholic, but maybe they're going a little too strong on it, or sometimes affecting a few things here and there, right? Or they have seasons of like heavy dose, heavy not. Because I want to talk about the person who doesn't have a natural addiction per se, but they fall into it sometimes.
I think you're talking about a binge-purge cycle.
Sure.
Usually that is still an addiction. It's driven by trauma, but for whatever reason, there's some seasonality to the trauma. So they can go months or even years appearing to be totally healthy, long periods of sobriety. And then they relapse for
Right.
a period of time, and,
Right.
and that's cyclical. And Dave could probably give us deeper insight on that. But
Well, before we do that, would you say that there's a difference between that, like the person you just described as someone who's been addicted for that long and getting in the marriage, not really truly knowing each other, and like someone who has a purge cycle? Is that what you just said, Alan? Was a purge
Binge
cycle?
purge.
Binge purge.
Yeah.
Would you say that there's probably a difference there?
I'm going to say yes. There's probably a difference from the female perspective. If we don't know what's going on, it's not going to matter if it's full time or if this is a purge binge cycle.
Sure.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Sure.
They're still not sharing that
Yeah.
with the women in the relationship.
Yeah.
Although I am hearing from the younger women that the men are sharing their porn addiction with the younger dating, age group, I should say. And the young women are like, oh, I guess this is just part of what I'm going to get. And the men are like, yeah, this is part of the deal. So that's an interesting new dynamic.
The normalizing of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, before we get into that, let's talk about that cycle of addiction.
So you brought up a great question about what about the casual user, I think was really the intent of the question. What about the people who just use it once or twice a week or something along those lines? First of all, Kristy's 100% right. That if anything is done secretly, there's a reason why you're trying to do it secretly. If you're going to justify something, there's a reason you're trying to justify it. So that I had to tell you the first thing. But even the casual user is the beginning. It might not progress all the way to catastrophic behaviors that we might deal with, but it starts with an initial use, and over time, people start to abuse it. They find out that, hey, this is good for this purpose, this is something I enjoy, whatever it is, and they start to abuse it and use it inappropriately, which then moves to a level of tolerance. You become sort of desensitized to it. Whenever you use any type of substance or process, as you use it, your tolerance for it develops, and you have to use more of that substance, right? So someone acting out in a matter of sexual integrity or sexual acting out is going to seek novelty and newness, right? Well, that's going to develop ultimately into dependence, where they're going to need that substance to be able to feel that way. Ultimately, that could lead to addiction, and then we go through a whole process of relapsing. When they try to get sober, back to initial use, and that whole cycle goes up again and again. What the point I'm trying to get at is there may be people out there who use some type of sexual acting out, pornography, strip clubs, whatever, and they never develop into an addiction. But the use in itself is a problem because it is an isolatory behavior, and frankly, it's an unholy behavior. That's not designed for us to do. You said it's not that extreme, but let's really be honest for a second. When an 8-year-old sees adults having sex and then the perversions that go with that is extreme.
Yeah.
It's a
realization that it's all extreme.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's apply our culture to the addictive cycle just for a second, right?
Yeah.
Initial use, sexual revolution brings it in. Abuse, things start to get out of hand. We use it inappropriately. We develop a tolerance to it where we might even have a conversation. Well, what about just the casual user of porn? Imagine that conversation 60 years ago. That would have never happened, right? Then we move to a dependence and then to addiction. We are at a stage now where we have become so tolerant of sexualization that it's normalized. That even the advertisement, the movies.
Is that what needs to happen to help end human trafficking?
I did an
Yes.
I did an experiment on my.
Well, hold on.
Yeah, sure.
The question I asked was, is it? Make sure I understood it right. Is normalizing sex what will help end human trafficking?
Oh, the exact opposite.
Yeah. Well, hold on. Let's think about this again.
Normalizing healthy sex or unhealthy sex?
Hi, devil's advocate here. I want to know if sex is just a normal thing. Can we make it to where it's not traumatic?
Sex is a holy thing. And so if it's done in its appropriate context, absolutely, it's a wonderful thing to talk about and do and experience. Outside of its holy context is when it becomes perverse.
Well, okay, let's take faith out of it then. If we were to normalize sex, would we take the trauma out of it? Is that possible?
Are you talking about normalizing healthy sex?
No, normalizing just like, hey, this stuff happens. You can watch pornography online. You can purchase sex. It's to those who consent, as long as there's consent. that's the lie, right? Is the consent part. But if it's normalized, because like you said, it was more extreme 60 years ago than is now. So do we normalize
I understand you.
that way?
I want to say no, absolutely not.
Okay, why?
Because let's just use a drug allegory. What if we legalize heroin and opiates and just let everybody have a free for all?
That is an argument.
That will de-shame it, but you will end up hurting an awful lot of people, because the truth is that those foreign substances are not good for us. They're just not.
Yeah, because
they're not healthy in any dose.
The argument to doing it or allowing it, like someone who takes heroin, like usually it's a shot. I don't know much about drugs, to be honest. But I know that like there's a dangerous way to do it, and so they're like, hey, we can help deaths by doing it. Like in this space, you can do it without repercussions. You guys know what I'm talking about? These centers that exist for like taking heroin and stuff like that?
I know what you're talking about. I think that is just not the right approach.
Well, no, of course it's not.
And I think the people who advocate that, while they may be very intelligent and intellectual, I think they maybe have a conflict. Like maybe it's their job to keep the prison population down because their state budget just can't handle anything.
Sure. You're getting into something.
Or maybe they're addicted themselves and they're lazy and they don't want to see any expectation that they have to do the very hard work of overcoming their addiction. It's easier for them.
Away the consequence.
Yeah, it's easier for them to advocate.
Consequence of you're going to die.
They want to de-shame it, deconsequence it, so they can get what they want without any reprisals. But none of that is God's design. He wants for the addicts that He loves, for them to overcome that and step into His plan for their life. And stop wasting it.
I think what you're ultimately saying is normalizing it is just prolonging the inevitable.
Yes.
The inevitable is you're going to kill relationships. Mm-hmm. You're going to take away the gift of sex, which is, we're going to get more into the weeds about how it truly affects your brain, but I cannot imagine someone enjoying sex with their spouse who is able to do it on demand with pornography. You know what I mean?
Do you mean if their spouse wants to have intimacy with a porn-addicted partner, that the porn-addicted partner is not able to respond to them in a healthy way? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's literally causing erectile dysfunction and stuff.
Yeah, because they're wasting their sexual energy. They're attracted to a million images online, not necessarily their wife anymore. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
They're attracted to a fake presentation.
Right, and then the death spiral that presents in a marriage is, I'm not going to say this with an absolute, but in my experience, nobody likes to be rebuffed when they get up the mustard to ask their partner if we can have intimacy. It can be very hurtful. And if a betrayed spouse, for example, or the spouse who's married to a porn-addicted partner is rebuffed a few times in a row, I think we could all understand if she was no longer interested or felt wounded about that. So it makes it even harder for the couple to connect again. And it just gets worse and worse because the addicted partner, having not connected with his wife, there's a reason to keep self-medicating in the way that he's used to. And it's a death spiral in a marriage.
So you talked earlier about what happens to your brain when you have an orgasm, when you're having sex, right? Mm-hmm. So what is the difference, maybe, and you can help me out with this, Dave, what the difference between what happens in your brain when you're watching porn versus what happens in your brain when you're having healthy sex? Is there a difference, and what is it?
Yes and no. Mm-hmm. It is the same result, but perhaps with greater intensity.
Okay.
So, for instance, any drug is going to alter the way that you react and interact with reality. So you can either choose to bond with your spouse or you can choose to bond with a screen. And Kristy said something earlier that's a really important component of this. is the illusion and delusion of safety. Interacting with people is dangerous. Alan was just talking about being rejected by your spouse. That hurts, especially when we look at why someone develops into these behaviors. Generally speaking, they either come from abuse or abandonment, and that's really rejection. And so when they have to face the potential of being rejected by their spouse once or multiple times or indefinitely, that's really painful and terrifying. But when you turn on that screen, it does what it's supposed to do every single time. It delivers what it is supposed to deliver, along with a whole lot more you didn't expect. But there's not a chance of rejection at that point. It becomes very safe in the moment. The consequences are high, the cost is high, and there's no benefit. But the result is the same. Do you want to be bonded and connected with your spouse, or do you want to have that bonding connection with an inanimate object?
But
That'd be your
Jeremy,
choice.
porn never says no.
Let's talk about that.
Porn never says no.
Is there a healthiness to saying no?
For a woman?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a gift, but it's also a challenge in a marital relationship. But it gives the addicted partner justification in their own mind on why they can go act out with the porn.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, my spouse said no, or my partner said no, so I don't like no. I want what I want, what I want, when I want it now, and so I just march myself into my little isolated space.
Yeah.
And I say, find something that's going to say yes.
That is the number one thing we deal with on the men's side, is dealing with the entitlement, that I deserve to have what I want right now, regardless of requiring any type of effort or work to do it, that I deserve it. Absolutely the number one barrier to get through in recovery first is entitlement, and then we move to some other issues, but absolutely 100%.
How do you deal with or talk or counsel someone who's been told it's unhealthy if you're used to having sex on a regular basis, suddenly, because this is a story I hear all the time, mostly among Christian men. Their wife just had a baby. They're out for 8 weeks,
Sure.
that 6 week, right?
Yeah. At best.
That's usually when these thoughts come into play of like, all right, I need to release. What am I supposed to do? Mm-hmm. So how do you usually guide them through that?
Well, the first is you don't. That's
Sure.
that's a lie. You don't. Not that you're
Well,
lying,
hold
but
on,
what's
hold
being
on,
said is a
though.
lie.
There literally medical advice is coming out that it's literally healthy, or sorry, I should say unhealthy to not.
Correct, over long periods of time. There are natural processes that will deal with that. The reality is that the lie that if I don't have sex every 72 hours, which is a number that keeps coming up, is not true. In fact, one of the therapeutic things we do is to put the guys through 90 days worth of sobriety. That includes, if the spouse is willing, to not even have sex with their spouse. I want you to imagine with me for a moment, if you have a large grass field and you were to walk through that field the exact same way every day, what's going to develop in that field?
The grass is going to be down.
Right. You're going to develop a path.
path.
Exactly. Yeah. And so when these guys have these acting out behaviors, they're laying down a pathway in their brain that says, I know exactly how to get what I want, and they know to do it immediately. And it becomes very easy. There's no work you have to do to walk through it. So there's this compulsion of I can get to what I need instantaneously, and I need it immediately, that entitlement we talked about. But what happens if you stop walking down that path every day? Over time, the grass is going to grow back. That's what we call neuroplasticity, that your brain is going to rewire itself back to a healthy state. We could get on a whole nother topic of how we are losing the ability to remain focused over a long period of time because of the instantaneous reward of social media, of technology, microwaves. I mean, everything that we want immediately we get rather than having to wait. And so we think, I want to have sex, therefore I can have it within 72 hours. That's not reality. And you're not going to die. You're going to be okay. and you will learn how to deal with this. We have guys who are going into 2, 5, 7 years of sobriety because their marriages aren't together anymore. They're not acting out alone. They're not acting out with someone. They're very healthy. They're not dead. They're not dropping dead of heart attacks. They're all right. In fact, they're doing fantastic. They get healthier than they've ever been. So I would argue the other side of that yes, there are of course natural healthy benefits of those types of releases, but it needs to be done within a holy context to make it healthy. If it's unholy, it's not going to be healthy.
You bring up an interesting segue into this. Would you say that even if a man is not watching porn, but feels like he must every 72 hours have sex or have a release of some kind, is he addicted to sex?
No.
Okay,
Probably not. I wouldn't say that. To answer your question,
yeah,
I'm not saying he is not. I would not say that he is.
Okay,
But
so
I know
what's the difference there?
So remember our cycle of addiction, we still have initial use, abuse, tolerance, and dependence leading then to addiction. Just because someone uses with frequency and maybe even with compulsion does not necessarily equal addiction.
Sure.
Not every guy who has... If you'll imagine, remember in high school, the old school Venn diagrams, those little circles that overlap each other, right? So what we want to imagine is in the first circle, we have sexual integrity. That's acting outside the rules or the confines or definitions of a relationship. So for instance, a Christian married couple would only have sexual, emotional, intellectual, all these intimacies to the highest levels just with each other. And anything outside of that's a violation, right? That's a sexual integrity issue. I live in a part of Florida where we're the nudist capital of the world. And a lot of the people who live there have different lifestyles, the phrase they might use, where they're open to a lot of different sexuality. They even have rules that exist, and you can violate those rules, right? So there's a sexual integrity issue, first of all. The second one would be dependency or addiction. They're not the same thing. You can develop dependency without going all the way into addiction. Addiction is sort of the end result. So we're not really there yet. We're talking about some of the dependency that develops to get to that. Last one, by the way, is the intimacy disorder, and we get in that middle tempest is where we have all the problems. But so we have 3 real different distinct categories: intimacy disorders, sexual integrity issues, and then dependency and addiction.
Help me, Kristy, what would you say is the difference between dependency and addiction? And that's talking about pornography or sex or anything like that.
That's a really good question. I would love to have a deeper conversation with Dave over that because I think it opens up maybe a potential can of worms. So are we saying, I'm just going to say this out loud,
from my own
are we saying
experience,
self-gratification is okay for men? And if we are, then is it okay for women?
No.
Right.
Okay, so I think we need to clarify.
on the difference. And some definitions for addiction do mention this. But I think if a guy's stuck in dependence but not yet addicted, yes, he's been doing it, he has a tolerance for it, and even a dependency on it. But he's not going to let the times and ways in which he acts out with this inappropriate sexual behavior to displace the things that are important in his life. Once he crosses into that area where he begins to sacrifice the things that are important to him in his life, his love relationships, his job, just to act out sexually, then I think we're squarely in addiction.
So to help draw the line, right? It's a dependency means you want it, you kind of desperately want it, but you're able to control your compulsions.
Yes.
Is that sort of the difference?
Let's use a more classic definition.
Sure.
So we have dependency, we would put sort of in the physical category. Your body has become used to something.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Addiction would have more of a mental component. And so a dependency of something that you want. Let's say if you're addicted, you developed a dependency, on caffeine. You don't need that.
Yeah.
You can stop drinking caffeine. The addiction component is when you override the healthy behaviors to get what your body wants. When you make self-harmful, destructive choices to get what your body has become accustomed to getting. So that would be a little more of a classic difference between a dependency, physical, and then addiction, mental. When it becomes self-destructive, that's when we've gone into a whole other category.
Let's talk about something basic like coffee. If I were to say to you, I stopped drinking coffee 2 weeks ago, and I just I've had a headache like every day since.
Yep.
Does that mean I was addicted to coffee, or I had a dependency on coffee?
I would say
Probably a
dependency.
dependency.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's the difference between addiction to coffee and but if I were to say,
Did you spend your family's rent on coffee?
right, okay.
Did you sneak out of work to go use coffee in the back room?
That's
Did
fair.
you-
Yeah. So now,
Do you hide your coffee?
Yeah, do you hide
All
your
right,
coffee?
yeah, okay.
Do you sneak over in the closet and not tell your wife you got Starbucks?
Right.
I mean,
Now
what
no. There's a difference between shame
yes.
and addiction.
Yes, shame would be the root cause of almost all addiction.
Because you're doing it too much. Is that kind of like the shame you're talking about?
Oh, such a great question. No.
Okay.
Yes, but no. I'm sorry, I give a lot of yes, but no.
Yeah, it's
yes,
okay.
but no.
It's
Please
okay.
explain.
That's
So-
what all this is, right?
There's an excellent theory of all addiction that it's rooted in what we call a shame core. Guilt is I've done something wrong. Shame is there's something wrong with me. And so at that point, when someone at an early age, they're neglected, right? My parents don't love me enough to care for me, or they are abused, that I'm worthless, I'm an object, right? They don't understand their own value and importance. They at that point develop a shame core that something is fundamentally broken or wrong with me. A child doesn't have the ability to emote outside of themselves to understand, no, this is my caregiver's problem, not mine. The only way that they can physiologically process that information is neurotically and narcissistically, meaning inwardly. They can only determine that it's about them. So therefore, something's wrong with them. They don't want to feel that way. So they can find a way to find some type of connection or some type of numbing effect, and then they develop that over time. That can be all sorts of things. That can be substances or all sorts of processes, even in the category of self-harm. But it all comes down to a shame core that they don't want to feel anymore. That's the second thing. I talked about entitlements, the first thing we have to deal with. The second path toward healing is dealing with the shame. The behaviors, that's the first step. We want to stop it. Stop doing stupid things. But if we don't go to the next step into recovery programs rather than just accountability programs, they never get the healing and they always go back. So until they get the healing from incredible wounding going through their life, they will never find a place of freedom from the things that are burdening them.
What do you think?
Amen, amen, and amen.
Okay.
That is the root of where all of this needs to go, is helping hurt people heal.
And I would like to circle back to your original question. Is there a difference for men between the male orgasm that's resulting from watching pornography versus one with their wife or with a real human being? And according to this recovery workbook that is a Pure Desire product, Dr. Ted Roberts and his wife wrote this. It's designed for young men, ages
Top Gun.
ages 15 to 25. And Dr. Roberts was a Navy pilot back in Vietnam, and he does really an extraordinary job of drawing analogies and allegories from real scenarios that happened for him in battle and the battle of fighting sex addiction. It's really a very well-written book. And in there, he talks about your question, is there a difference? And according to Dr. Roberts, there absolutely is. So they have scientific evidence that an orgasm, the male orgasm, from a man having sex with his wife is 5 times more satisfying than the orgasm that comes from acting out with a synthetic, like pornography. And that's what makes pornography the perfect drug, because just like any other drug, it promises a certain high and can never deliver it. So, the person who's acting out that way just chases it and chases it and chases it. And, all the negative consequences that we've talked about so far, are at play with that. According to Pure Desire Ministries and Dr. Ted Roberts, there is an extreme difference between those two outlets, where the healthier one that God designed is much more fulfilling, and they can prove that.
So I think that kind of answers a question into, does pornography does or can, right, There's kind of a big difference between those questions. Does or can pornography lead to sex buying? And what you just said was, this high ain't getting it. I got to get the next high.
Yeah. We talked about this a little bit in the product we did last year on recovered sex buyer. But there absolutely is a connection. And in that video series, I point out that watching pornography is its own form of sex buying. Mm-hmm. You know, the actresses that are in those video clips are oftentimes trafficked, they're compelled, and they don't get to keep the money that is being generated from their activities. Even if you're viewing on a free site, your mouse clicks, engagement time, it's all justified by that pornographer, to garner advertising revenue, which is what keeps the women that you're watching in bondage. So there's really no way to argue that it's not, because it is.
There's a lot to unpack with, I think, which I think we will in our next episode when we talk about resources to help with pornography. But now I want to start talking about real quick the direction of, do you need help with pornography? Is someone who watches it once a year need help with pornography versus the person who watches it 3 times a day? What's the difference between those two people? And I want to ask this to Kristy first. What is the difference to a spouse of someone, if you're married to a spouse and then he watches porn once, maybe twice a year versus we already know what you feel about 3 times a day. What would be, is there a difference to the wife?
I don't think so. I think it leaves women confused. Well, if I'm here, why not choose me? Why are you choosing the synthetic, the fake, the unreal? And then if the man were to actually share his screen and show the woman what he actually is watching, now the woman says, oh, well, I can never be that. I can only be me. So then immediately the woman goes into her own shame cycle, because I can never be all those different things and those nuances and those niches.
When someone is acting out, they are in a different part of their brain known as the limbic system, which means they are disconnecting from the frontal part of their brain where they're making all the executive decisions, right? When you disengage that on a regular basis, you lose all that executive function. That's why addicts act so irrationally, right? When any type of addict, when you are not engaging the frontal lobe of your brain, you're going to make stupid choices, irresponsible choices. It doesn't matter the category of the decision. So if you're constantly engaging a limbic response in what you're doing, then you're not going to have executive function in your work, in your family, in your life, in your decisions. Life just sort of happens to those who are in an addicted state. They don't take control of what's happening in their lives. So when these guys start using at 8 or 9 years old, they stop maturing and developing all the coping mechanisms that the rest of us adults actually have to use every day, like how to wait for something, just as an example. Could you imagine what it's like when these guys finally get well and all of a sudden this 8-year-old wakes up and he has a mortgage, he has a couple of car payments, he has a report due on Friday to his boss, his wife's mad at him, his kids are disobeying? Could you imagine that overwhelming sense of an 8-year-old waking up to that one day and they have to learn very quickly? So I would say yes, 100%. They are completely not operating out of an executive function but out of a limbic response, and it causes chaos in every area of their lives.
I want to help people who feel like they're not addicted to pornography, people who feel like they're not addicted to sex, people who feel like they are dependent upon it. Because I actually think that is the majority that would possibly even be listening to this podcast. That it is the person who doesn't watch it often, but has sometimes. And they know it's wrong, but how do I bring it up to my spouse? And if I say that I have this issue, I don't want them to think I'm addicted, because I'm not that. So I'm caught in the middle. And I cannot help but feel like that's the majority of men, which means the majority of our churches, which means the majority of our children, which means the majority of our marriages. So, Kristy, one of the things you said was you want to come in here to help bring hope. What hope does that person have? And as coming from a spouse's perspective of how hard that is, what is their first step?
Gosh, Jeremy, I'm going to cry. I really am. Women want their men to be all that God has purposed them to be, period.
And I can't help but feel like repentance is the first part of that.
Yeah, if this is a stumbling block to you being all that God has for you to do and lead on this earth, the women want to know, and the women want to help, and the women they want their men to be amazing, godly men. No matter the cost that it would cost us to know the deep, dirty, dark secrets. So, men, tell your women.
If I were to speak
With help.
if I were to speak to one of those guys now, I would say, I love you. I'm sorry about whatever it is that's hurting in you. And I promise you there is a place of healing, and there is so much more for you, man. So much more that you can't even imagine. There's going to be some consequences of some of your actions from the past. It's going to be difficult. But there are men out there who will stand with you, will accept you for all the stupidity that you've done, will love you, and will encourage you through it. And you can become the man of God that you were designed to be. You can become the husband you were designed to be. You can become the father you were designed to be. Where there is a place of hope, I know there's a place of healing, and it is out there for you.
I want to just add this to, I don't think there's one man that could be listening to this who can say, like, I've never even had a thought of a struggle with porn. Maybe they haven't been addicted per your definition, but there's been a struggle. And it can be overcome, and it can be stopped, and that doesn't define them, and that also doesn't define their marriage. It doesn't define the direction that they're going to lead their kids. And it doesn't mean that they can't lead their kids in a healthy way. I heard this recently, like, just because you have damage in your life, just because you make mistakes, just because you're not perfect, does not mean you can't lead someone else in the right way.
That's true.
I think a lot of times we're like, well, I make mistakes, so I got to let my kids make mistakes.
No, I know lots of high trauma people that have managed to raise secure children. Mm-hmm. It's possible. There's some work that they have to do.
It's a lot harder
to
if
achieve
you're not
that.
by example.
Yeah.
It ran in my family until it ran into me.
Yeah.
It's a recovery phrase that we'll use a lot. It can stop with you.
Yeah, I want to chime in on Kristy's initial response. I'm going to quote Dr. Ted Roberts again. He is at end of life with Parkinson's and chose to write another book. And this book is designed for leaders, for guys that are like 5 years in and may still feel the pull. And it's outstanding. It's called Compassionate Warrior. And in that book, he reiterates what we've said here, that addiction is driven by shame. And he goes on to say that shame comes from what we perceive other people are thinking and saying about us. And what other people think and say about us doesn't matter. Only what God says and thinks about us matters. The biggest and most important milestone in the road to recovery for guys who might be struggling with this, if they're in that dependent stage, is to strengthen their relationship with God. If they can come to the place where they just know they are absolute royalty, that they're a beloved son of the King, the shame goes away. And that's the fuel that's been driving it all along, right? So that's the best place to do the initial work, just like Kristy said. become everything God intended you to be. It's 100% right.
This will lead us into our next episode when we talk about resources to help out with sexual addiction, pornography addiction. And I should say, I kind of want to change it now to almost and dependencies, unhealthy dependencies. Pornography addiction should be done by a different type of professional, kind of what you're helping with, Dave. And a pastor can talk about the dependencies. And if we can help that, I think that's the first place we can start, by making sure pornography just stops affecting our children, stops affecting our marriages, and stops affecting the sexual, commercial sex industry. That's literally what this organization is trying to help stop. So if you want to stop the demand, stop acting like we haven't or don't see this or don't struggle with it. It's preposterous.
Yeah, we touched on this at a recent event. We had a sexual integrity workshop on January 25th, and we had an amazing presenter that zoomed in from Houston, and he reminded all of us of the famous song by Simon and Garfunkel, The Sound of Silence. One of the lyrics in that song is, "Silence like a cancer grows." And it was so profound, because we don't talk about this issue enough. There's so much shame and stigma around it, that everything you said, Jeremy, is absolutely true. We need to start a conversation if we want to deal with it. Because if we don't, it will continue to grow like a cancer. It will continue to destroy men, families, churches, and really our society and nation at whole.